Hello, we're going to introduce you today to our specialty dessert wines and brandies. We're going to begin with our Cerise Cherry Port, and with me to help is Mark Johnson, winemaker, Bill, tasting room manager, and I'm Marie. Our Cerise Cherry Dessert Wine is a very unique product. Cerise means cherry in French. It's made from distilled cherries blended with our cherry wine to about 19% alcohol. So in effect, it's a fortified wine, like a port-styled wine. It's very sweet, has a warming mouthfeel, and it's delicious, of course, with dark chocolate brownies.
Out of respect for our colleagues in Portugal, we don't call these port wines, but they are made in that style. We start juice fermenting and then arrest or stop the fermentation by the addition of alcohol. In the case of the two cherry products, or cherry and grape products, it is cherry alcohol, cherry brandy that's added. In the case of the entice, we'll talk about later, it's grape brandy. These wines are quite sweet, as are most port wines. The residual sugar on the Cerise is 17%, so really getting up there. About 10 grams per liter of acid, and the alcohol 19%.
Which translates to a nicely balanced beverage. It's just great how many people who might not have much experience with wine fall in love with this wine, even though it is obviously something, it's a specialty, it's unique, but I think it's a great testament to how well balanced that wine is, as to how massively appealing it is.
Next is basically a variation on our Cerise called Cerise Noir, which of course means black cherry in French. It's a cherry brandy that we blend with a few red wine grapes that offers a deeper range of fruit flavors from that red wine blend, and also a slightly less sweet taste to it. Again, terrific after dinner or served with chocolate desserts.
So the Cerise is 100% cherries. The Cerise Noir is roughly 80% red grapes, usually Pinot Noir. We have put in some Meunier, and then arrested the fermentation with cherry brandy or cherry eau de vie. I always suggest drinking that in a leather chair in front of a fire with a golden retriever at your feet and a smoking jacket and a fine cigar. The residual sugar is lower. It's a drier port-style wine than the Cerise. It's only 10% residual sugar. Acid is a little bit lower as well at 8.1, but the alcohol is right up there at about 19.5%.
And just to review, I'm in the habit of explaining them this way. Take cherry wine and distill it, and you get cherry brandy. And add that cherry brandy back to either cherry wine or grape wine, and that is what you get here. They're all three of our fortified wines are approximately 1/5 brandy and 4/5 wine.
Right.
Next up is one of the more rare and sometimes not in stock product that's called entice. And entice is a really unique item that is unique, I think, to the area, that being a blend of our oak-aged brandy and our ice wine.
When we're pressing frozen grapes for ice wine, we press down to a certain level of sugar in the juice. It starts out at about 50% sugar in the juice off of the press, and we go down to about 30 to 34%. And what's left after that is much higher than even our late harvest Rieslings, but it's not up to the level of the ice wine. And so in order to utilize that product, which has all of the flavor components of the ice wine but doesn't have the richness of it, we came up with the idea of the entice. Like Marie said, it is made from ice wine grapes, and then the fermentation is stopped by grape brandy. Residual sugar here, very high, 25%. The acid is also very high because most of the grape wine in there is Riesling, and we're concentrating not only the sugars but also the acids in that grape. So almost 13 grams per liter of residual sugar. And the alcohol, because not much of the grapes are fermented, it comes mainly from the addition of the brandy, but since it's only 20% of the blend, the alcohol is 19%. Not as high as it could be if we were to ferment those ice wine grapes all the way to the end.
And say it again, very unique product. I'm unaware of anybody anywhere nearby offering anything like that. And for that alone, it's very easy to recommend someone at least try it.
Next in line we have one of our very most unique and special and hard to make wines that everyone calls ice wine. Ice wine is a sweet and viscous dessert wine. Shows concentrated apricot, toasted caramel, and baked apple. It's an incredibly rich, lush, and sweet, full-bodied wine, but balanced by a nice high acidity to it. We serve it slightly chilled after dinner in very small portions. It's of course sold in a half bottle, 375 milliliters, and in this wooden box.
In order to be called ice wine, the grapes by law have to be frozen on the vine. They do not freeze at 32 degrees because of the sugar concentration in the grapes. It takes temperature somewhere around 15 to 17 degrees Fahrenheit for them to freeze. It's usually the end of December that we're out in the vineyard, and in this case it went into January where we were picking the ice wine grapes, the frozen grapes. The grapes also have to be pressed frozen. Out of a ton of regular grapes, we'll get about 160 to 170 gallons of juice. From a ton of frozen grapes, because we are eliminating the water, we only get about 40 gallons of juice. So you can see where the concentration comes from, the richness, the lushness, also the price, because it's very expensive to make. The residual sugar on this is 25%. The acid is at almost 13 grams per liter. It again is a concentration of everything that's in the grape. And the alcohol, because the yeast doesn't like that high concentration, it's very difficult to ferment, stopped at 7.5% alcohol. By law, it has to be above 7% in order to be called wine. So we just made it with this one.
Liquid gold. It's concentrated, both sugars and flavors, is how I refer to an ice wine typically. And typically it's comprised of approximately half Riesling grapes, and the other half is a trio of unnamed grapes that, as I understand, were planted for the sole purpose of becoming ice wine. And that's kind of an interesting story, and it does distinguish our ice wine, I think, from the neighbors. And by the way, as far as I know, you can make ice wine really from any grape. It just seems that Riesling is a popular choice for winemakers when it comes to ice wine.
And lastly, in our specialty category, we have our oak-aged brandy that we call Saint-Gasset. And that has a little bit of a unique story to tell behind it. When we were thinking of the name, we first thought, well, this brandy spends 5 years in French oak barrel. So cinq means 5 in French. Further thought, we realized there's a phrase in French Canada that they say Saint-Gasset, which is 5 to 7, which represents their happy hour. So we thought, well, that's a great idea for a brandy. Good time to enjoy that is during happy hour. Of course, thanks to Google, we learned the origins of the phrase Saint-Gasset, which dates back hundreds of years to the country of France, where Saint-Gasset was the time of the day that a gentleman would visit his mistress. And we thought perhaps with this brandy in tow, he might show up one day somewhere between 5 and 7. This is a 40% alcohol spirit. It's made from distilled grapes that, as I mentioned, have been aged for 5 years in French oak. It shows honey, spice, and butterscotch. We serve it at room temperature or over ice after dinner, depending on your tastes.
Actually, this was almost 6 years in the barrel because it took us that long to get the packaging that we were looking for. So what we're saying is it's a minimum of 5 years, and oftentimes it's going to be longer than that. It's a blend of several different grape varieties. There are red grapes in there as well as white grapes. But after distillation, the brandy that comes off of the still looks like water, eau de vie, water of life, or fire water. The color comes from the aging in the oak barrels. It is a Michigan appellation simply because we're not allowed to put Old Mission Peninsula on a brandy, on a spirit. There's zero residual sugar in this, or very, very close to zero. And as Marie mentioned, the alcohol is 40%.
And it's been very well received since we began offering it. I can honestly say that those many folks who try this, who claim to be regular drinkers of such an offering, have heartily approved of it and suggested kudos to the winemaker for a relatively first time out being such a nice brandy.